Thanks, Neil. That was great. My name is Jim Giocomo. I'm the Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture Coordinator, and proud to be up here as one of this year's Texan by Nature Conservation Wranglers. The Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture and our Grassland Restoration Incentive Program are the things I'll be talking about today. As far as the Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture goes, we have 8 staff that work across a large area, but we're also a large partnership, public-private partnership of state and federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, universities, corporations, and individuals working together to meet shared environmental challenges and opportunities in Central Texas and Oklahoma through bird conservation. And I'll talk a little bit more about bird conservation in a minute. And our partnership is relatively young. We started in 2008, so we just celebrated our 10th year. We're just getting into our teenage years. Our partnership is a true joint venture in that each of the individual entities that are part of the partnership maintain their individual organizational identity, but when we get together, we talk about our shared opportunities and challenges and our shared priorities and share the costs and benefits of our working together. The Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture is one of 18 bird habitat joint ventures across North America, extending into Canada and Mexico. We're one of the smaller joint ventures. We're at 60 million acres total, so about the size of the state of Oklahoma plus the size of the state of West Virginia. We're in an ecological transition zone where the east, we're at the edge of the eastern forest. To the west of us, it's mixed grass prairie. Coming from the north, the tall grass prairie extends into our area. And then we have the Edwards Plateau, which is hard to classify with any other type of ecoregion. We also have 6 of the largest 25 cities in the United States within this ecoregion area, as we just saw in some of Neil's slides. Some of the counties are 95% agriculture, so extremely urban to extremely rural, and 95% plus private land. We're up at around 97% in Texas in the Oaks and Prairies. We have more land that is underwater, under reservoirs, than we do public land. So just to emphasize how many people are in the area, this is kind of a time series from 1940 of housing densities, modeled housing densities, and you can see the I-35 corridor, the red areas, Dallas, Fort Worth up there, going down to San Antonio and Houston, and stepping from 1940, 1970, 2000, 2010, 2020, and then what it's going to look like in 2030. And the part of Texas that we work in mostly is that nice red area that follows the I-35 corridor. And I was going to say, talk about why we talk about birds. I always get that question. As a bird habitat joint venture, it's kind of our mandate from the executive order that established the joint venture program. But we also, for practical reasons, birds live at the same time and perceive the world as the same as us. So we see in color, we live during the day, we can relate to birds. Birds are in almost all habitats except underwater. We use fish for underwater purposes. And then birds can fly. We can't fly. We'd love to fly, but we can't. So birds are pretty cool. From my experience unloading trucks and working with truck drivers and trying to go through grad school, everybody had a bird story. When you tell them that you're an ornithologist and you work with birds, everybody has a bird story. And I would argue that if it was as easy to get videos of a bird on a nest as it is to get cat videos, the internet would be filled with bird videos. So let's do something about that. Also, just sheer numbers, birding is popular, wildlife watching is popular. According to surveys, in Texas there are 4.4 million wildlife watchers out of the 28 million population. 2.2 million are wild bird observers. And of the wildlife watchers, they spend about $1.8 billion on equipment and travel per year. So a big part of the economy. Nationally, there's a lot of people who feed birds. 1 out of 3 in North America put out up 60 pounds of supplemental seed each year. So that's a lot of food moving around. And one of the neat things about birds, because they live at the same time as we do and perceive the world similar to us, there's always been a tradition of amateur ornithologists contributing to data and science for a long time. So there's databases out there like eBird now that are really taking advantage of the citizen science interest in birds. And this is one of the products. There's a little video clip there, but I don't have control of how to play the video clip. But right now is a great time to be an ornithologist because there's a lot of data coming together from these citizen scientists that are building really cool models that not only tell us, we used to have just snapshots in time of what's going on. We'd have the breeding bird survey in the summer and we'd have the Christmas bird count in the winter. And this, now we can tell throughout the year what time of the year the different species are coming into and out of our areas. And with over 600 species of birds in Texas alone, knowing what each one is doing and how to manage those species is a big challenge, but a lot easier with this information. And finally, the birds are literally our canary in the coal mine. We all know the story about coal miners who used to bring a caged canary into the mine, and the canary would be singing, and if it stopped singing, that means that the mine was filled with noxious gas and all the miners needed to get out as quickly as possible. Same thing with the environment. Birds react to environmental changes as we do, and sometimes faster. They're our leading indicators of ecosystem health. They're what we can track to tell whether things are going well or not. And there's a recent study that came out that calculated 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970. And in grasslands, the story's even worse. More than half of the birds have been lost from grasslands, 720 million since 1970. And 1970 is when the breeding bird survey, that citizen science project started. So that's the data that we have available. We know some of these declines have been happening since before 1970, but that's where we have data available. And even some of our most common birds, like the eastern meadowlark pictured here, 3 and 4 have been lost. But I don't want to, well, for Texas, it's a similar pattern. These are some of our more common birds. The northern bobwhite's been about 3/4 lost since 1970. Eastern meadowlark, same thing. Scissor-tailed flycatcher, about 1/3 have been lost, and the northern shrike is about 3/4 have been lost. But it's not all doom and gloom. We've seen this before. The joint venture program started in the 80s with concern about wetlands and waterfowl populations declining. And there was a massive national level reaction to that, including the no net loss of wetlands in 1989. And you could see from this graph, wetland birds, we've been able to turn it around with concerted efforts. And we're looking for that same kind of concerted effort to address our forest birds and especially our grassland birds. You can see on that bottom line, the grassland birds populations are declining. So that is our goal. That's what we're trying to do right now. Let's turn that line around. And the Oaks and Prairies joint venture put together a grassland conservation business plan where we identified 4 specific strategies with a bunch of actions underneath them to at least stabilize population decline, if not reverse the decline in the next 10 years. And what we have for each of our strategies, we can calculated we could level off populations of, for this example, northern bobwhite at different levels, and that dotted line represents the level where we would like to arrest the population decline, and with our goal being 3 million acres of good grassland management over 10 years, or about 5% of our land area. in grassland management. What does that mean? It means we have to work with a lot of private landowners. As Neil showed, there's a lot of, most of the land is agricultural land in private hands. So we put together a Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, or GRIP, which provides incentive payments to landowners to do conservation practices on the ground. And our program works in parallel with the Farm Bill programs from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, things like EQIP and Conservation Reserve Program. But we use other sources of funding so we can address some of the areas that these programs can't hit because of various rules that are involved. So, and we're working together with NRCS to be able to put conservation projects in areas where they'll be helpful. We also have focal counties where we're trying to concentrate our efforts in 30 counties in Texas, which are the ones outlined in green, and about another 10 counties in Oklahoma. And we're doing basic land management, the same practices that Aldo Leopold talked about when he was establishing wildlife management as its own subject area. The same exact practices of prescribed fire, brush management, grass reseeding, and prescribed grazing, and rolled it into this GRIP program, and so that we can have a tagline of "Get a grip on grassland conservation." And again, we have focal counties where we're trying to work with landowners, and our program specifically is trying to provide training wheels for a lot of these new landowners who are getting to the land and trying to figure out what do we do now that we have, now that we own all this agricultural land, and we'd like to help out wildlife, and we'd like to produce whatever products we're going to produce, either ranching or farming. How can we do all those things at the same time? And we've been able to, since 2014, conduct over 200 projects, total acreage of about 85,000 acres and counting right now, about $1.2 million in total agreements, and our match is about 3-to-1 investment with some of our dollars right now, so pretty good match. And here's an example of some of the projects that we're doing. In DeWitt County, we were able to do 235 acres of brush management, which is needed in a lot of areas. If you don't manage an area, if you don't burn it, if you're not grazing it, the brush will encroach into the grasslands, and it'll take full-on mechanical removal of that brush, which is super expensive to do. It's about $450 an acre for us to pay for half the estimated cost of removing brush. Whereas one of our least expensive per acre practices is prescribed fire. Now, we're talking about health of the land, and we're talking about prescribing fire, which means following a plan. It's not a controlled fire, it's not a wildfire. It's doing the fire with a plan in the right time in the right place. And this project, they were doing brush management, range planting, cross fencing, prescribed grazing, and fire breaks. And we helped put in Stevens County 1,556 acres. And that one just happened a couple months ago. And then in Val Verde County, in the Edwards Plateau, the edge of the Edwards Plateau, we about 800 acres of prescribed fire. And then in Stevens County, we did a small prescribed fire, and sorry for the long quote, but I thought this was great. I had a pretty amazing experience back in August. I was driving along the field when we burned a couple of years ago around dusk, when I saw what I thought was a dove getting up in front of my truck and land about 30 yards ahead of me. As I got a little closer, I realized it wasn't a dove, but a quail. I got out and tried to closer for a picture when the rest of the covey busted and flew into the cedars. I think there was close to 25 or 30 birds, and most of them were from this year's hatch. I was elated to see quail again, especially next to our burned field. So that's one landowner's reaction to what looks like a devastating change through fire, but is actually restoring practice for grasslands. And then this one in Austin County, 50 acres of range planting with a much shorter quote. Check this stuff out. I feel like we're doing something now. I had to change stuff for the audience. So we don't just provide incentives, there's a whole part of the partnership that works with the staff of the various agencies and organizations to provide technical guidance, to build relationships with landowners. We say it takes at least 8 visits with a landowner to build trust. So the investment of time is just as important as the investment of money. We're trying to create win-win-win situations, triple bottom line, where we're doing good things for the landowner. They want to make their land healthy and create the products that they want to create. We're also trying to help the birds and create their habitat. And then for the rest of us who live in Texas, it's a win in that healthy land will also help with water quality and air quality and all of those larger, harder to manage issues. If we have healthy land, if the birds are telling us the land is healthy, then the land will be healthy for all of us. And so it takes a lot of partners working together to do all this work. And so we've got different partners doing different parts of the various types of projects that we do. We do conservation planning and conservation design that drives into our conservation delivery, which is putting acres on the ground, getting that last mile delivery of conservation, which then we use our research and monitoring to look back at what we've done on the ground to figure out if that's what we thought we were going to do was actually what we did on the ground. And that whole process to get around that wheel, we've done that once in 10 years so far. So it's not something that's going to happen fast. The grasslands have been declining the grassland populations have been declining for 60 years, so it's going to take some time to dig our way out, but we are making progress, and it takes a whole lot of partners working together, and so we're excited to have all of these partners and more that have supported our work so far. And just wanted to end on the last slide of we're not doing necessarily anything new, we're just doing it in new ways. This is a quote from 1929. We need to protect all species of birds and animals while they are common so that they did not become rare. It's not just about rare species, it's not just about endangered species, it's about species that are very common species that you'd hear all the time. And this is one of my conservation heroes, Rosalie Edge. Somebody needs to make a movie about her, because the one quote about her, there was a biography written. She was the only honest, unselfish, indomitable hellcat in the history of conservation. And wouldn't you like to have that reputation for a little while? So that's all I have today, but thank you for your attention.